My grandmother lied about my mom's death for 15 years to keep me from finding out she was still alive. I was 8 when Dad sat me down and explained that Mom had died in a car accident. He showed me the newspaper clipping, the funeral program, even took me to visit her grave every Mother's Day. Grandmother would hold my hand at the cemetery, tears streaming down her face as she placed flowers on the headstone. "She loved you more than anything," Grandmother would whisper. "She'd want you to be strong." For 15 years, I believed it. I grieved her. I talked to her picture every night. I inherited her jewelry when I turned 18, a box of treasures Grandmother had saved for me. The lie unraveled completely by accident. Last month, I was cleaning out Grandmother's attic after she moved to assisted living. Buried behind Christmas decorations, I found a shoebox full of letters. The return address made my hands shake. Mom's full name and an address in Oregon. The postmark was from 3 weeks ago. My dead mother had been writing letters. With trembling fingers, I opened the most recent one. "Dear Mom, I know you'll never respond, but I have to keep trying. Violet turns 23 next month. Does she still love art? Does she remember the stories I used to tell her? I've written her so many letters over the years, but you return them all unopened. Please just tell me she's okay. Tell me she's happy. I think about her every single day." I sat there on the dusty attic floor, reading 15 years of unopened letters. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, school photos she'd somehow obtained, a wedding invitation to a ceremony that never happened because she thought I hated her. Each letter begged Grandmother to let her see me. Each one was more desperate than the last. The final letter was the worst. "I'm getting married next month to a wonderful man who understands my past. We want children, but I can't move forward without knowing if Violet is alive and well. This is my last letter. If you don't respond, I'll assume she wants nothing to do with me and I'll stop trying." That's when I found the thick manila envelope hidden at the bottom. Inside were copies of every letter I'd never received. Birthday cards, graduation congratulations, care packages for college, all returned to sender by Grandmother. I drove straight to the assisted living facility. Grandmother was in her garden, tending roses like she hadn't destroyed my entire life. "Why?" I asked, dropping the shoebox at her feet. Her face went white. For a moment, she looked exactly like the frail old woman she was, not the manipulator I'd just discovered. "She left you," Grandmother said finally. "She chose drugs over her own daughter." These letters don't sound like someone who chose drugs. Grandmother's eyes hardened. "You don't understand what she put this family through." "Then explain it." She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Your father was cheating. Your mother found out and threatened to take you away from us. We couldn't let that happen." The words hit me like a physical blow. "So you convinced me she was dead?" "We convinced her you were better off without her." I stared at this woman who'd raised me, who'd comforted me through nightmares about losing my mother, who'd helped me place flowers on a fake grave for 15 years. "Where is she?" Grandmother looked up with eyes full of regret. "Portland." "But Violet, you have to understand." I was already walking away. That night, I booked a flight to Oregon. I found her address through the letters. For the first time in 15 years, I was going to see my mother. But what I discovered when I got there changed everything I thought I knew about my family. The address led me to a modest blue house in a quiet neighborhood. Children's toys scattered the front yard. Wind chimes hung from the porch, playing the same melody Mom used to hum when she tucked me in. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes, working up the courage to knock. Through the front window, I could see her. She was older, her hair shorter, laugh lines around her eyes. She was helping a little boy with homework at the kitchen table. The scene looked so normal, so peaceful. Everything I'd been told was a lie. When I finally knocked, the man who answered was tall with kind eyes, the husband she'd mentioned in her letters. "Can I help you?" he asked. Before I could answer, I heard her voice from inside. "Who is it, honey?" "I'm looking for my mother," I said, my voice barely steady. His eyes widened with understanding. "Violet?" She appeared behind him, and the years collapsed. She looked exactly like I remembered, just older. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she made a sound like she'd been punched. "Baby?" she whispered. I started crying immediately. 15 years of grief and anger and confusion poured out of me in that doorway. She pulled me into her arms, and I was 8 years old again, safe and loved. "I thought you hated me," she sobbed. "I thought you never wanted to see me again. I thought you were dead." I managed through my tears. Her husband, David, I learned later, ushered us inside. The little boy at the table turned out to be my half-brother, Leo, who was 7. He looked just like I did at that age. "You're my sister?" he asked, not understanding the magnitude of what was happening. Mom couldn't let go of my hand as she explained everything. After she discovered Dad's affair, she'd demanded a divorce and full custody. That's when Dad and Grandmother conspired against her. They'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt from her past. "A brief struggle with prescription painkillers after a surgery when I was 6. It was 3 months," she said. "I went to rehab, got clean, never touched another pill. But they used it to paint me as an unfit mother." The family court battle was vicious. Dad had money and connections. Mom had a public defender. Grandmother testified that Mom was unstable and dangerous. They had witnesses testify about things that never happened. Mom continued, her voice getting stronger as she told me the truth. "Your father's secretary claimed she'd seen me drinking before picking you up from school. His golf partner said I'd called him asking for drug connections. All lies, but convincing ones. Why didn't you fight harder?" I tried. For 8 months I fought. But every court appearance, every deposition, they'd bring up new accusations. They said I'd been prostituting myself to pay for drugs, that I'd left you alone overnight while I was getting high. None of it was true, but the mud was sticking. She showed me the court documents she'd kept all these years, page after page of character assassination, carefully orchestrated to destroy any credibility she had. The breaking point came when they threatened to put you in foster care, she said. They claimed that if the court couldn't trust me, and if your father was proven unfit due to his work schedule, you'd become a ward of the state while they investigated both of us. They made me choose, Mom said, her voice breaking. Give up all rights to you, or they'd drag the case out for years, traumatize you with custody battles, and likely win anyway because of my medical history. Worse, you might end up in the system, so you signed away your rights? They told me it was temporary, that once things settled down, we could revisit it. But they lied about that too. That's when she showed me the real kicker. A document I'd never seen before. A restraining order Dad had filed against her, claiming she was stalking me and making threats against the family. I tried to see you at school once, she said, just to make sure you were okay. The principal called the police. Your father had told them I was dangerous. She'd spent years trying to contact me through lawyers, only to be told I didn't want to see her. When she tried to call, Dad said I was too upset to talk. When she showed up at school, Grandmother convinced her I was scared of her. They orchestrated the fake funeral to make it final, she said. Your father showed me pictures of you crying at my grave, said you were finally getting closure and I needed to let you heal. But you kept writing. I couldn't stop hoping. Every birthday, every Christmas, every major holiday, I'd send letters to Grandmother begging for news. She returned them all unopened. But there was more to the story. Mom had moved to Oregon not just to escape, but because Dad's family had connections everywhere in our home state. They'd made sure she couldn't get decent work, couldn't find an apartment, couldn't even get a library card without someone recognizing her name and treating her like a criminal. Your Uncle Pete called every job I applied for, she said. Told them I was a drug addict who abandoned her child. It took me 3 years to realize I had to leave the state entirely. Uncle Pete, Dad's brother, who'd always been my favorite relative. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who never missed a birthday, who'd comforted me at Mom's funeral. Pete knew the truth. They all knew. Your Aunt Linda, your cousins, even your father's parents before they passed. It was a family conspiracy. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every time someone asked about Mom and they'd all get that sad, sympathetic look, they knew she was alive. They knew I was grieving a lie. That's when she showed me her room. It was a shrine to me. Photos of me from elementary school through college. Somehow she'd gotten copies. My school awards, art projects she'd persuaded teachers to share, newspaper clippings when I made Dean's List. She'd been following my entire life from a distance. But it wasn't just photos. She'd kept everything. Report cards Mrs. Thompson had smuggled to her. Programs from school plays she'd never been allowed to attend. Even a napkin from my Sweet 16 party. Apparently, the caterer's daughter had been in my class and thought Mom deserved to know I was okay. How did you get all this? I asked. Your second grade teacher, Mrs. Thompson. She never believed I was as bad as your family claimed. She'd send me updates, photos from class parties. She's the one who told me you were studying art in college. Mrs. Thompson. I remembered her. The teacher who always asked about my mom, who seemed sad when I said she was dead. She knew. She suspected something was wrong when you suddenly stopped talking about me and started saying I was dead. But she couldn't prove anything. What about the other teachers? Some helped when they could. Your high school art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez. She sent me photos of your paintings, said you had real talent, just like your mother. She didn't know I was alive, but she knew something wasn't right about the story she'd been told. The network of people who'd helped without knowing they were helping was staggering. The school nurse who'd mentioned my menstrual cycles to Mom through Mrs. Thompson, so she'd know I was healthy. The librarian who'd noted what books I checked out. Even the custodian who'd told Mrs. Thompson when I seemed sad or upset. There were so many people who cared about you, Mom said. They just didn't know how to help. David brought us tea and quietly explained that he'd been encouraging Mom to hire a private investigator to find me. She was afraid you'd reject her, he said. But I told her she had to try. We were supposed to start the search next month, Mom said. I'd given up on Grandmother responding, but I couldn't give up on you. David had his own story. His first wife had died of cancer when Leo was 3, and he'd met Mom at a grief counseling group 2 years later. She talked about you constantly, he said with a sad smile. For the first year I knew her, I thought you were dead too. It wasn't until we got serious that she told me the truth. What did you think when you found out? I asked him. I was furious, he said. I have a daughter too, from my first marriage, and I couldn't imagine anyone keeping her from me. I wanted to drive to your state immediately and confront your father. Why didn't you? Because your mother was terrified it would backfire, that your family would convince you she was trying to disrupt your life, or worse, that they'd move you somewhere she'd never find you again. We talked until dawn. She told me about her life, how she'd moved to Oregon to start over, become a social worker helping kids in foster care, met David at a grief counseling group after his first wife died of cancer. I wanted to help children who felt as lost as I did, she said. But her work had a darker motivation too. She'd specialized in cases where children were separated from fit parents due to false allegations or family manipulation. I've reunited 17 families over the years, she said. Every time I helped a child find their way back to a parent who loved them, I imagined someone doing the same for you and me. Leo had been David's son from his first marriage. Mom had raised him since he was 3 after David's first wife died. He knows about you, she said. I've told him stories about his big sister who lived far away. You talked about me? Every day. David says I talk about you too much. She smiled through fresh tears. He's not wrong. Leo had his own questions. At 7, he couldn't understand why his sister had been gone so long, but he was excited to finally meet me. I saved you this, he said, running to his room and returning with a drawing he'd made. It was a stick figure family. Him, Mom, David, and a taller girl labeled Violet. I drew you bigger because Mom said you're grown up, he explained. That's when I realized the full scope of what had been stolen from us. Not just 15 years together, but Leo's childhood with his real sister, graduations and birthdays and holidays, the chance to grieve together when my grandfather died last year. I'd cried alone while she wasn't even told he'd passed. Grandfather's funeral, I said suddenly. You didn't know? Mom's face crumpled. He died? When? Last December, cancer. It was quick. She sobbed then. Not just for the loss, but for missing the chance to say goodbye to the man who'd raised her. He loved you, I said. Even after everything, he'd ask about you sometimes. I think he knew something wasn't right. But grandmother always changed the subject. Did he suffer? No, he went peacefully. Dad said his last words were about hoping you were happy, wherever you were. We held each other while she grieved the father she'd lost twice. Once when she was forced to leave, and again when he died without knowing the truth. That afternoon, she took me to places she'd lived when I was little, places I barely remembered, but that flooded back as we walked through them. The park where she'd taught me to swing, the ice cream shop where we'd go for special treats, the library where she'd read to me every Saturday morning. I come here sometimes, she admitted as we stood outside our old apartment building, just to remember when we were together. The building manager recognized her, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd always liked Mom. Is this little Violet? She asked, beaming. My goodness, you're beautiful. Your mother used to bring your picture to show me how you'd grown. She did? Every year on your birthday. She'd cry and tell me stories about what you must be doing, what you must look like. I always wondered why you never visited. Another person who'd known the truth but hadn't been able to help. I need to call Dad, I said that evening. Mom's face hardened. Violet, you should know. He remarried when you were 12. They had 2 kids. Boys. He replaced us both. I'm so sorry, baby. I never wanted this for you. The stepmother had seemed nice enough when I was growing up, but now I wondered what she knew. Had Dad told her the truth about Mom? Did she know she was helping raise a daughter stolen from her mother? I called Dad from Mom's kitchen, putting it on speaker so she could hear. Violet? It's early. Is everything okay? I'm in Oregon, I said, with Mom. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Sweetheart, your mother is alive. I know. I found the letters. Another pause. You don't understand the whole story. Then tell me. But instead of explanations, he started making excuses. The custody battle had been expensive. I was better off with stability. Mom was unstable back then. They were protecting me. You let me grieve a living person for 15 years. We thought it was best. You thought it was convenient. Mom squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face as she listened to him scramble for justifications. The affair was a mistake, he said. I was young and stupid. But your mother was going to destroy our family. You destroyed our family. I cut him off. You were the one cheating. You were the one who chose to lie instead of face the consequences. She was going to take you away from me. Because that's what happens when you betray your wife. You don't get to have both the affair and the family. I want to see you, Dad said finally. Come home and we'll talk. I am home, I said, looking around Mom's kitchen. I hung up. The phone rang immediately. Then again, Dad called 6 more times before I turned it off. That night, Mom showed me the legal documents she'd kept. Not just the custody papers, but everything. The restraining order. The psychological evaluation they'd forced her to undergo. The drug test she'd passed, but that somehow got lost by the court. They had me evaluated by 3 different psychologists, she said. The first 2 said I was a fit mother. The third was a friend of your father's lawyer. The psychological evaluation from Dad's expert was devastating. It painted Mom as manipulative, unstable, and potentially dangerous to me. It recommended supervised visitation at best, full separation at worst. I kept copies of everything, she said. Even though my lawyer said it was over, I knew someday you might want to know the truth. The most painful document was her own handwritten statement, 12 pages of her side of the story that the court had refused to consider. In it, she detailed Dad's affair, his drinking, his increasingly controlling behavior. She documented dates, times, witnesses. She'd built a compelling case that the judge had ignored. Judge Morrison, I read from the file. I remember him. He and Dad played golf together. That's when I knew I'd lost, Mom said, when I saw them laughing together in the courthouse hallway. But the truly sickening part was what came after. The court documents showed that immediately after Mom signed away her rights, Dad had petitioned to seal the case. Everything we'd just read, the lies, the manipulation, the corruption, was supposed to be buried forever. He didn't want you to ever find out, Mom said, even when you became an adult. The next morning, I called Mrs. Thompson. She was retired now, but remembered me immediately. Violet, how are you, sweetheart? I found my mom, I said. The silence on her end was deafening. Oh, honey, she finally whispered. I'm so sorry. I tried to help, but I didn't know how. You did help, more than you know. She told me her side of the story, how she'd noticed the change in me after Mom died, how I'd gone from a bright, confident child to a sad, withdrawn one almost overnight. You used to talk about your mother constantly, she said. She was your whole world. Then suddenly you wouldn't mention her at all. When I asked, you'd just say she was dead and change the subject. Why didn't you report it? I tried. I called the school counselor, suggested maybe you needed help processing your grief, but your grandmother came in for a meeting and explained that you were seeing a therapist, that the family was handling it. There was no therapist? I know that now. But at the time, I had no reason to doubt her. She seemed genuinely concerned about you. Mrs. Thompson had spent years wondering if she'd failed me. She'd sent those updates to Mom not knowing if they helped, but hoping they meant something to someone who cared about me. Your mother sent me a Christmas card every year, she said, just to thank me for the photos. She never asked for more than I was comfortable giving, never put me in a position where I'd have to lie. She was always respectful. What did you think happened to her? Honestly, I thought your father had her killed. The casual way she said it shocked me. That sounds extreme, I said. Does it? A woman threatens to expose a man's affair and take his child. She has a history of prescription drug use that makes her vulnerable to accusations. She disappears completely, and suddenly there's a convenient car accident with a body that's never found. The body was found. I saw the newspaper clipping. Different woman. I looked it up years later when the internet made it easier. The woman who died in that accident was named Patricia Morrison. Married, no children. Nothing like your mother's situation. Even my second-grade teacher had put together a better investigation than I had. That afternoon, Mom showed me the cemetery where I'd been visiting my grave. The headstone was real. They'd actually purchased a plot and stone with her name on it. The newspaper clipping? I asked. They used a real accident from the same day. Different woman, similar age. Your grandmother was always good with details. Is anyone buried here? No, it's an empty plot. We stood there looking at her fake grave, and I thought about all the times I'd cried there, begging her spirit to send me signs she was okay. I'm so angry, I told her. Good, she said. You should be. But she had her own anger to work through. 15 years of believing I hated her. 15 years of wondering if I was safe, if I was happy, if I even remembered her. Do you know what the worst part was? She asked as we drove back to her house. Tell me, your 16th birthday. I spent the whole day imagining you getting your driver's license, going on dates, becoming the woman I'd never get to meet. That night, I had a breakdown. David found me on the bathroom floor, sobbing uncontrollably. What happened? He held me while I cried, and then he said something that probably saved my life. He said, she's out there loving the memory of you, even if she thinks you're gone. That love doesn't disappear. Someday she'll understand. I thought about 16-year-old me, crying myself to sleep because I missed my dead mother, neither of us knowing the other was alive and grieving the same loss. I stayed in Oregon for 2 weeks. I met Mom's friends, who'd heard about me for years. Her best friend, Carmen, hugged me like she'd known me my whole life. Your mom has your baby pictures on her phone, Carmen said. She shows them to everyone. We all feel like we watched you grow up. I helped Leo with homework and learned he was obsessed with dinosaurs, just like I'd been at his age. I watched Mom and David together. They were genuinely happy, the kind of contentment I'd never seen in my father's house. David had his own way of making me feel welcome. He'd clear out his home office so I could have a quiet place to process everything. He'd cook my favorite foods. Somehow Mom had told him things I liked that I'd forgotten telling her when I was little. She never stopped being your mother, he said one evening as we cleaned dishes together. Even when she couldn't be with you, she never stopped loving you like one. I asked him about the years before I'd found them. She'd have good days and bad days, he said. Good days, she'd be hopeful. She'd talk about what she'd say when she saw you again, what she'd want to know about your life. Bad days, she'd be convinced you were better off without her. What changed? Leo. When I adopted him, watching her become his mom, she was so natural at it, so good. It made me realize how much had been stolen from both of you. The night before I was supposed to fly back, I made a decision. I want to stay. I told Mom, honey, you have a life. I have a job. That's not the same thing. I want to get to know you. And Leo, I want to be part of this family. She cried and held me like she was afraid I'd disappear again. I called my boss and quit, found a sublet in Portland, started working at a local art gallery while figuring out my next move. But staying meant confronting the rest of my family. Dad called constantly, demanding I come home. Grandmother called crying, begging me to visit. I ignored them both. Then Uncle Pete called. Your father told me what happened, he said. I think you're making a mistake. You knew she was alive. Silence. Pete, you knew. You all knew. It was complicated. It was criminal. You helped them destroy evidence, falsify documents, commit fraud. We were protecting you. From what? From having a mother who loved me? He tried to justify it for 20 minutes. How Mom was unstable. How the family was just trying to do what was best. How I didn't understand the full situation. I understand that you're all liars, I said, and hung up. Aunt Linda tried next, then my cousins. Each call was the same, a mix of defensiveness and attempted manipulation. They'd minimized Mom's pain, justified their deception, and tried to convince me I was throwing away my real family for a fantasy. The worst was my cousin Beth, who I'd been close to growing up. She abandoned you, Violet, Beth said. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. A real mother would have fought harder. She did fight. Your family destroyed the evidence. You're being dramatic. You had a good childhood. You were loved and cared for, built on a lie. Sometimes lies protect people. Sometimes lies protect liars. After I hung up, I felt hollow. These people had been my world for 15 years. They'd celebrated my birthdays, attended my graduations, comforted me when I was sad, and all of it had been built on the foundation of keeping me from my mother. Then Dad showed up in Oregon. I was having coffee with Mom when I saw him through the window, standing on her front porch. She went rigid. You don't have to see him, she said. Yes, I do. He looked older, grayer. When Mom opened the door, he stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. You look good, he said quietly. What do you want? Mom asked. To talk to my daughter. I'm listening, I said from behind Mom. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd learned the truth 2 weeks earlier. Dad looked around at the photos of me covering the walls, the evidence of 15 years of love from a distance. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. How far did you mean for it to go? I asked. He couldn't answer that. I was young and stupid. I made mistakes. You destroyed our family because you couldn't keep it in your pants. Mom flinched but didn't defend him. She was going to take you away from me, Dad said, because you were cheating on her. I know I hurt your mother, but I couldn't lose you too. So you made sure she lost me instead. That's when he broke down. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen him use when he wanted something, but real, ugly sobbing. I regret it every day, he gasped. Especially after I met your stepmother. Watching her with our boys, seeing what a real mother looks like, I realized what I'd taken from you. And from her, I said, gesturing to Mom. I tried to find her when you turned 18, to tell her you were an adult and could make your own choices. But she'd changed her name, moved away. I thought she was gone forever. She was right here, writing letters, begging to see me. He looked at Mom with something that might have been remorse. I never saw the letters. Mom handled all that. Don't blame grandmother, I said. You could have stopped this anytime. You could have told me the truth when I turned 18, when I graduated college, when I got engaged last year. You were engaged? Mom asked, surprised. It didn't work out. Turns out I have trust issues. I looked pointedly at Dad. I wanted to tell you, Dad said, but I was afraid you'd hate me. I do hate you, I said simply, but I would have hated you less if you told me the truth. We sat in silence. Finally, Dad asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you coming home? I am home. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. What about school? Your job? Your friends? I can finish school anywhere. I'll make new friends. As for work, I looked at Mom. I'm thinking about social work. Mom smiled, and I knew she understood. I wanted to help other kids who'd been lied to, manipulated, stolen from their families. What about your stepmother and the boys? They love you. For the first time, I felt a pang of guilt. My half-brothers were innocent in this. They were 8 and 10, and they adored their big sister. I'll maintain a relationship with them, I said, but not through you. Dad left that evening. He hugged me goodbye, and for the first time, it felt like he was saying goodbye forever. I love you, he said. I know, I replied, but love isn't enough when it comes with lies. After he left, Mom and I talked about what came next. I don't want you to give up your whole life for me, she said. I'm not giving it up. I'm taking it back. 6 months later, I enrolled in Portland State's social work program. Mom and I see each other almost every day. Leo calls me his real sister now, not his half-sister. David treats me like I've always been part of the family, but integrating into their life wasn't seamless. There were awkward moments, inside jokes I didn't understand, family traditions I hadn't been part of, memories that didn't include me. Sometimes I felt like an intruder in their established dynamic. It's going to take time, Mom said, during one particularly difficult dinner when I'd felt left out of a conversation about Leo's early childhood. We have to learn how to be a family together. She was right. We had to figure out how to navigate holidays, how to handle disagreements, how to balance my relationship with her against her relationship with David and Leo. There were also practical issues. I had to transfer my credits, find new doctors, establish residency. I had to learn to drive in a new city, figure out the public transportation, find grocery stores and banks and all the mundane aspects of building a life somewhere new. But the hardest part was dealing with my own trauma. 15 years of believing my mother was dead doesn't just disappear because you find out it's not true. I had night terrors for months. Dreams where I'd wake up and she'd be gone again, where I'd discover this was all an elaborate hallucination. You need therapy, Mom said gently after I had a panic attack in the grocery store because I'd lost sight of her for 30 seconds. I don't trust therapists, I said. What if they're working with Dad's family too? She found me a therapist who specialized in family reunification after parental alienation. Dr. Martinez understood immediately what I was dealing with. Your grief was real, she told me. Even though your mother wasn't actually dead, you experienced a real loss. The relationship you had with her was killed, even if she wasn't. Therapy helped me understand that I was grieving multiple losses. The mother I'd lost at 8, the 15 years we'd missed together, the family I'd thought I had but never really existed. It also helped me work through my anger, which was enormous and consuming. I was angry at Dad for starting the lie, at grandmother for maintaining it, at Uncle Pete and Aunt Linda for supporting it, at myself for never questioning it. Anger is appropriate here, Dr. Martinez said. The question is what you want to do with it. Dad sends money for school, which I accept. He's trying to make amends the only way he knows how. His new wife sent a card apologizing for the family's actions. Apparently, she'd figured out the truth years ago and had been pushing him to find Mom. The stepmother, Angela, called me directly one day. I want you to know I never knew the full story, she said. Your father told me your mother had abandoned you, that she was unstable and dangerous. I believed him because I loved him and trusted him. When did you figure out he was lying? When Tyler started asking about his sister's mother. Your father got so defensive, so evasive, that I started digging. I found some of the court documents in his office. Why didn't you say anything? I tried. I told him he needed to tell you the truth, but he was terrified you'd cut him off completely. I did anyway. I know. And honestly, I think that's what it took for him to realize how badly he'd screwed up. She asked if I'd be willing to maintain a relationship with my half-brothers, and I said yes. They were innocent victims in this too. The boys, Tyler and Mason, didn't understand why I'd moved away or why I was suddenly talking about a mother they'd never heard of. Angela explained it as gently as she could, that there had been a misunderstanding about their sister's mom, and now we were fixing it. Is she nice? Tyler asked during a video call. Very nice, I said. You'd like her. Can we meet her? I looked at Mom, who nodded. Maybe someday. Grandmother passed away last month. She'd been in declining health since I discovered the letters. In her final days, she asked to see me. I went, but I didn't forgive her. I thought I was protecting you, she whispered from her hospital bed. You were protecting yourself, I replied, from facing what your son had done. I never meant for it to last so long. When? When did you decide 15 years was too long? She couldn't answer. She died holding the photo of Mom and me from my 8th birthday. the last picture taken before their lie began. At her funeral, I stood between my two families, Dad's side on one side, pretending to grieve for a woman who destroyed lives to protect her son, and Mom on the other side, attending to support me despite everything grandmother had done to her. The pastor talked about grandmother's devotion to family, her sacrifice for her loved ones. I wanted to scream that her devotion had been selective. Her sacrifices had been other people's lives. After the service, several family members approached Mom, the first time they'd seen her in 15 years. "You look well," Aunt Linda said stiffly. "No thanks to you," Mom replied. Uncle Pete tried to shake her hand. She ignored him. "I hope you can forgive us someday," he said. "I hope you can live with yourselves," she replied. I stood next to the fake grave they'd made for my mother and thought about all the ways the truth gets buried. How easy it is to convince someone that love looks like lies, that protection requires destruction. Dad stood on the other side of the cemetery, watching us, but not approaching. He'd lost the right to be part of this moment. After everyone left, Mom and I stood alone at grandmother's actual grave. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Empty," I said. "She took so much from us, and now she's gone and we'll never get answers to half our questions." "What questions?" Like whether she ever regretted it, whether she ever thought about telling me the truth, whether she understood what she'd done to you. Does it matter? I thought about that. No, I guess not. She made her choices. And now we get to make ours. 3 months after grandmother's death, I got a call that changed everything again. It was from a lawyer representing her estate. "Ms. Chen, I'm calling about your grandmother's will. She left you something that I think you need to see." The law office was in my hometown, so Mom and I drove there together. My first time back since I discovered the truth. Driving through familiar streets felt surreal. Everything looked smaller, shabbier than I remembered. The lawyer, Mr. Hughes, was clearly uncomfortable. "Your grandmother left detailed instructions about when to give you this," he said, handing me a thick envelope. "She specified it should only be given to you after her death, and only if you had already discovered the truth about your mother. She knew I'd found out. She received a report from the assisted living facility about your visit after you found the letters. She'd been expecting this for years." Inside the envelope was a letter in grandmother's handwriting. "Violet, if you're reading this, then you know what we did. I won't insult you by trying to justify it, but I want you to understand why. Your father wasn't just having an affair. He was embezzling money from his company to pay for it. When your mother found out, she didn't just threaten to leave him. She threatened to turn him into the police. We couldn't let him go to prison. You were 8 years old. You needed at least one parent. So we made a choice. We convinced your mother that if she disappeared quietly, we wouldn't press charges for her prescription drug use. If she tried to take you or expose your father, we'd have her arrested and you'd end up in foster care while she went to jail. She agreed to leave because she thought she was protecting you. But then your father's company started investigating the missing money anyway. He was going to be caught regardless. Rather than admit we'd destroyed your family for nothing, we doubled down. We told you she was dead. We made it permanent. Every year that passed made it harder to tell the truth. How do you explain to a child that you lied about her mother being dead? How do you admit that level of betrayal? So we kept lying and lying until the lies became the truth. I know you hate me. You should. But know that I loved you, even as I was hurting you. Everything I did was because I couldn't bear to see you suffer. I was wrong. I see that now. I made you suffer anyway. The money I'm leaving you, it's not enough to make up for what I took, but it's what your mother should have received in the divorce. Use it to build the life you should have had with her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Love, grandmother." There was more. Bank statements showing Dad had stolen nearly $200,000 from his company, police reports I'd never seen, and a confession letter from Dad, written but never sent, admitting to the embezzlement and the frame-up of Mom. "Your grandmother kept evidence of everything," Mr. Hughes said. "I think she always knew this day would come. The inheritance was substantial, enough to pay for my remaining education and help Mom and David buy a bigger house so Leo and I could each have our own rooms. But more than the money, the letter gave me something I hadn't expected: closure. For 15 years, I'd wondered what I'd done wrong, why my mother had left me. Learning that she'd actually sacrificed herself to protect me transformed everything. She didn't abandon you," Mom said as we read the letter together in the lawyer's parking lot. "She saved you." That evening, I called Dad. "I know about the embezzlement," I said without preamble. Silence. "You let Mom take the blame for your crimes. Violet, she could have turned you in. She could have sent you to prison and kept me. Instead, she gave up everything to protect me from having a father in jail." "I know. Do you? Do you really understand what she sacrificed?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you ever try to make it right?" More silence. "Because you're a coward," I answered for him. "Because admitting the truth would have meant facing the consequences of your actions." I was afraid. She was afraid too. She was afraid I'd grow up without a father, so she gave up being my mother. I hung up and never spoke to him again. 6 months later, I started working at the state's child services department. My first case was a little girl whose father claimed her mother had abandoned them. The mother's family insisted she'd died in an accident. I looked at that file and thought about 15 years of stolen letters. "What does your instinct tell you?" my supervisor asked. "Someone's lying," I said. "Then let's find out who." It took 3 weeks. But we uncovered the truth. The mother hadn't died or abandoned her daughter. She'd been in a coma for 2 years after a car accident, and the father had told the child she was dead, rather than let her see her mother in a hospital bed. When we reunited them, the little girl, only 6 years old, looked at her mother and said, "I knew you weren't really gone. I could feel you." Some lies are too big to bury forever. Eventually, the truth finds its way home. Mom and I are planning a trip to visit the graves of her parents. My grandparents, I barely remember. We're going to tell them what happened and that we found each other again. "Do you think they'd be proud of us?" she asked. I think they'd be proud of you, I said, for never giving up. Last week, Leo asked if he could change his last name to match mine and Mom's. I want people to know we're really family, he said. David was supportive. Family isn't about names, he said. But if it matters to Leo, it matters to me. So we're all going to be the same family, officially. It took 23 years, but I'm finally getting my mother back. And she's finally getting her daughter. My grandmother tried to force me into an arranged marriage at 16, so I exposed her entire human trafficking operation. I should have known something was wrong when grandmother Violeta started measuring my hips at breakfast. Not casually, with an actual tape measure while I was trying to eat cereal. 34 inches, she announced to my mother, scribbling notes in her leather book. Perfect breeding proportions. I nearly choked on my Lucky Charms. What's happening? I asked, but Mom just stared into her coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. For 3 months, strange men had been visiting our house. They'd sit in grandmother's parlor, drinking tea while she paraded me around like a show pony. I was told they were business associates, but something about their stares made my skin crawl. The truth hit me when I found the contracts. I was looking for my birth certificate when I discovered grandmother's filing cabinet wasn't locked. Inside were dozens of folders labeled with girls' names, ages, and what looked like invoices. My hands shook as I opened the folder marked Esperanza, age 16. That was me. Esperanza was my real name, though everyone called me Essie. The papers inside made me sick. Medical records I'd never consented to. Photos someone had taken without my knowledge. And worst of all, a signed contract between my grandmother and someone named Dmitry Kozlov for $45,000. I was being sold. The medical records were horrifying. They detailed everything. Confirmation I was still a virgin, fertility assessments, even dental records. At the bottom, in grandmother's handwriting, delivery date, March 15th, payment upon receipt. March 15th was next week. That night, I pretended to have food poisoning and stayed in my room, photographing every document. There were 17 other girls' files. Some I recognized from school. Others were unfamiliar, with notes like deliver to client or payment complete. One file made me physically vomit. A girl named Luna, only 14, with a bright red deceased stamp across her photo. I had stumbled onto something much bigger than an arranged marriage. The next morning, grandmother announced my wedding to the family. Essie will be moving to Eastern Europe next week, she said over pancakes, as casually as discussing the weather. She's marrying a successful businessman who will provide well for her. My father looked confused. Since when? Since it was decided, grandmother cut him off with a look that could freeze hell. I excused myself and called my cousin Ricardo, who was studying criminal justice. When I sent him the photos, his response was immediate. Holy shit, Essie. This is human trafficking. Call the FBI. Now. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because that afternoon, I overheard grandmother coordinating with someone about other girls being moved the same week. This was happening to others right now. I needed more evidence. For 3 days, I became a spy in my own home. I recorded conversations, photographed visitor license plates, and documented every detail. She had been doing this for years, selling girls from our community to buyers overseas. The breaking point came when I discovered they planned to drug me. She's been asking too many questions, I heard grandmother tell someone. Give her the sedative in her morning orange juice. She'll sleep until Prague. Prague. I was being shipped to Prague like cargo. That night, I created a digital evidence package. Photos, audio recordings, financial records. I uploaded it all to a secure cloud drive and prepared to send it to the FBI, local police, and media outlets. But first, I had one more thing to do. The next morning, grandmother gathered the family for my farewell breakfast. Mom sat crying. Dad looked lost. My little brother Diego kept asking why I had to leave. As grandmother raised her orange juice in a toast to new beginnings, I stood up. Before we toast, I said, pulling out my phone, I have something to share. I hit play on the recording of her discussing my sale price. The room went dead silent. You sick bitch, my father whispered, finally understanding. Grandmother lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I'd already hit send on 18 different emails. Too late, I said. The FBI should be here any minute. And that's when she told me something that made my blood run cold. You stupid girl, she hissed. You have no idea how deep this goes. Your precious family is already on the list. Your mother agreed to this. Your father signed the papers. I turned to look at my parents. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad's face had gone white as fresh snow. What is she talking about? I demanded, my voice cracking like brittle glass. The silence stretched until my mother finally broke, her words coming out in broken sobs. We owed them money, she whispered, her hands shaking around her coffee cup. Gambling debts. Your father's gambling debts. They said this was the only way to make it right. My father stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair with a crash that echoed through our small dining room. Violeta said it was just an arranged marriage, he said desperately, his voice rising to almost a shout. Rich husband, good life in Europe. She never told us. Never said what? Grandmother laughed bitterly, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Never said you were selling your daughter to pay off your poker losses? Never said these men don't take wives? They take slaves? Never said half these girls end up dead within a year? The room started spinning. My own parents had sold me. My own blood, my own flesh and bone had put a price tag on my head and shaken hands on the deal. That's when the front door exploded open with a crash that shook the entire house. FBI! Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them! Agents flooded our dining room in full tactical gear, automatic weapons drawn, shouting commands that barely registered through the roaring in my ears. In the chaos, I saw grandmother frantically trying to destroy papers, stuffing them in her mouth and chewing desperately. My mother collapsed sobbing on the linoleum floor. My father was being handcuffed, his face a mask of confusion and terror. Agent Patricia Torres found me huddled in the corner behind the overturned chair, still clutching my phone like a lifeline. "Are you Esperanza Morales?" she asked gently, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising calm. I nodded, unable to speak. "You're safe now, honey. Your evidence package was incredibly thorough. We've been tracking this network for 8 months, but we never had an inside source with this level of access." Over the next several hours, sitting in a sterile FBI conference room with terrible fluorescent lighting, I learned the full scope of what grandmother had been orchestrating. Her Blessed Union's cultural marriage services was a front for an international trafficking ring that spanned 3 continents. She'd been operating for 15 years, targeting families in financial distress throughout Latino communities across the Southwest, and convincing them to marry off their daughters for debt forgiveness and promises of prosperity. The girls were never seen again. Luna, the 14-year-old whose file I'd found with the red deceased stamp, had died trying to escape a brothel in Moldova after being beaten so severely she suffered internal bleeding. 17 other girls had simply vanished into the network, their families receiving occasional fake letters and photos to maintain the illusion they were living happy, married lives. "Your grandmother was what we call a Tier 1 recruiter," Agent Torres explained, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. "She identified vulnerable families, built trust within communities through church connections and cultural organizations, then exploited desperate financial situations to convince parents they were doing what was best for their daughters. The financial records I'd photographed revealed transactions totaling over $1.2 million across multiple years, with individual sales ranging from $25,000 for younger girls to $65,000 for older teenagers with specific physical characteristics buyers had requested." Agent Torres opened the folder to reveal surveillance photos I'd never seen before. Pictures of grandmother meeting with men in expensive suits at upscale restaurants, exchanging briefcases in hotel parking lots, even boarding private jets with young girls who looked terrified and confused. "We've been building this case since 2019, she continued. "But trafficking networks are like icebergs. We could only see the tip. Your evidence gave us the entire underwater structure." During questioning, more family secrets emerged that made my stomach turn. My parents had been in debt for $47,000 from Dad's gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control over 3 years. What started as occasional poker games had escalated to daily casino visits, online betting, and eventually desperate loans from increasingly dangerous people. Grandmother had offered to clear the entire debt in exchange for me, presenting herself as a savior, offering a solution that would benefit everyone involved. "She had photographs," my mother sobbed during her interrogation, her mascara creating black rivers down her cheeks. "Pictures of other girls who'd married through her service. Beautiful houses, expensive clothes, jewelry. She said Essie would live like a princess in Europe, that these men specifically wanted American wives they could spoil and pamper." But the medical exams grandmother had secretly arranged through her network told a completely different story. The buyers weren't looking for wives to spoil. They were purchasing young, healthy girls for exploitation in various forms of forced labor, including prostitution, domestic servitude, and in some cases organ harvesting. "Did you know about the other girls in your community who had gone missing?" Agent Torres asked my parents during their second day of questioning. My mother broke down completely, her entire body shaking with sobs that sounded like they were being torn from her soul. "We suspected something was wrong when the Ramirez girl went missing last year," she confessed. "Rosa was only 15 when she left for her wedding in Romania." Her mother kept asking Violeta for more contact information, saying the letters Rosa was sending didn't sound like her voice. But Violeta always had explanations: cultural adjustment, learning a new language, being busy with her new wealthy lifestyle. The letters were fake. Rosa Ramirez had been killed 6 months after her wedding while trying to escape a trafficking compound in Bucharest. Her body was never recovered. Agent Torres slid another photograph across the table, a surveillance image from Romanian police showing a young girl who looked like Rosa being forced into a van outside a train station. "This was taken 2 days before she died," Agent Torres said quietly. "She'd managed to escape the compound and made it almost to the embassy before they caught her." My father, sitting in his orange jail jumpsuit, stared at the photo with haunted eyes. "How many?" he whispered. "How many girls did we help kill by staying silent?" 46. Agent Torres replied without hesitation. "That's how many girls your mother-in-law trafficked during her 15-year operation. Esperanza would have been number 47. 3 days later, the coordinated raids began. Using my evidence and testimony, along with months of FBI surveillance, agents simultaneously struck 12 locations across 4 states. The operation involved over 200 federal agents, local police officers, and international law enforcement partners. They arrested grandmother at 6 a.m. while she was trying to flee to Mexico with 3 suitcases full of cash and fake identification documents. She fought like a wildcat, scratching one agent's face and biting another before they could get the handcuffs on her. Dmitry Kozlov, who was actually Viktor Petrov, a convicted trafficker who'd been on Interpol's most wanted list for 7 years, was arrested at a luxury hotel in Phoenix where he'd been waiting for my delivery. When agents broke down his door, they found him with detailed plans for transporting 4 girls to various international destinations that same week. The safe house where I was supposed to be taken was raided simultaneously by a joint task force. Located in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson, it had been set up to look like a legitimate shipping business from the outside. Inside, they found 4 other girls: Carmen Vasquez, 17, from El Paso; had been held there for 3 weeks. She'd lost 30 pounds and had visible track marks on her arms from sedatives they'd been using to keep her compliant. Sofia Mendoza, 15, from San Antonio, had been there for 10 days. Her marriage to a businessman in Ukraine had been scheduled for the following week. Isabella Rodriguez, 16, from Phoenix, had arrived just 2 days before the raid. She was still fighting them, still had fire in her eyes, still believed someone would come looking for her. And Arya Chen, 14, the youngest, who'd been trafficked from Los Angeles after her family was convinced she was being adopted by a wealthy American couple who wanted to give her educational opportunities they couldn't afford. All 4 girls were rescued alive, though the psychological trauma would take years to heal. The media coverage was intense and unrelenting. Local news stations called it the largest human trafficking bust in state history. National outlets picked up the story when they learned a 16-year-old girl had single-handedly exposed an international trafficking network by documenting her own attempted sale. CNN interviewed me via satellite from the FBI safe house where I was staying. "What made you realize you had to document everything instead of just running away?" Anderson Cooper asked. "I found Luna's file," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She was 14 when they killed her. I kept thinking about all the other Lunas who might be saved if someone could prove what was really happening. I couldn't live with myself if I escaped, but left the door open for them to keep destroying lives. But the aftermath wasn't what I expected. My family didn't just fall apart. It disintegrated completely, like a house of cards in a hurricane. Dad was charged as an accessory to human trafficking, but got a plea deal for cooperating fully with prosecutors and providing detailed information about grandmother's operation. He received 5 years in federal prison, but would serve only 18 months with good behavior and continued cooperation. Mom was charged with child endangerment and conspiracy, but avoided prison time by agreeing to 3 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service with anti-trafficking organizations. Diego, my 12-year-old brother, went to live with our Aunt Carmen in Denver. He was too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, but old enough to know our family had been destroyed by choices the adults made. The first time I saw him after the arrests, he wouldn't look at me. "Why did you have to tell?" he asked quietly, his small hands twisted together in his lap. "Now everyone at school knows what our family did. Now I don't have a mom or dad anymore." It broke my heart into pieces so small I wasn't sure they could ever be put back together. I testified against grandmother at her trial, which lasted 6 weeks and made national headlines daily. She showed no remorse whatsoever, even when faced with 17 counts of human trafficking, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and dozens of other federal charges connected to girls who died in the network. Her defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, a woman who'd grown up in poverty and abuse who was simply trying to help families escape similar situations. But when the prosecutor asked her directly about Luna, about Rosa, about the other girls whose deaths were directly connected to her trafficking operation, she showed her true nature. "These girls had better lives than what they were leaving," she said coldly, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used when discussing my hip measurements. "I gave them opportunities they never would have had otherwise. If some of them were too weak to adapt to their new circumstances, that's not my responsibility." The courtroom was dead silent. Even her own attorney looked sick. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been handling trafficking cases for over 20 years, leaned forward with an expression of barely controlled disgust. "Ma'am, you facilitated the sale, rape, torture, and murder of dozens of children for profit. You destroyed families, traumatized communities, and showed absolutely no regard for human life. This court finds you to be a dangerous predator who poses an ongoing threat to society." She sentenced grandmother to life without the possibility of parole, plus 300 additional years to run consecutively. As they led her away in shackles, grandmother turned to look directly at me in the witness gallery. Her eyes were filled with pure hatred, but also something else, fear. For the first time in my life, the woman who had terrified me since childhood looked small and powerless. During the trial, I learned even more disturbing details about the scope of the operation. Grandmother had been abused and sold herself as a young girl in Mexico, trafficked across the border at age 13 by men who promised her family she'd find work as a maid for wealthy Americans. Instead, she spent 3 years in forced prostitution before escaping during a police raid in El Paso. Rather than breaking the cycle of abuse, she'd decided to profit from it, convincing herself that she was giving girls opportunities while building a network that generated millions in revenue. "Trauma doesn't excuse evil," Agent Torres told me after the sentencing. "Some people who experience horrific abuse dedicate their lives to protecting others from the same fate. Others become predators themselves, perpetuating the cycle because they've learned to see exploitation as normal." The psychological evaluation conducted by federal experts revealed that grandmother had been operating similar trafficking networks in New Mexico, Texas, and California over the past 20 years. I was number 46 on her master list of trafficked girls. 6 months after the trial ended, I was invited to testify before Congress about gaps in human trafficking prevention and prosecution. Standing at that podium in the House of Representatives, looking out at dozens of lawmakers who had the power to change systems, I thought about Luna, about Rosa, about all the girls whose names I'd never learn. "The average age of entry into trafficking in the United States is 12 to 14 years old, I told them, reading from testimony I'd prepared with help from victim advocates. "These aren't strangers snatching children off the street. 83% of trafficking victims are trafficked by people they know and trust. Family members, family friends, romantic partners, and community leaders." The Esperanza Act was passed unanimously 4 months later. It requires extensive background checks for international marriage brokers, creates stronger federal penalties for family members who knowingly participate in trafficking, establishes mandatory training for school counselors and teachers to identify trafficking victims, and provides funding for survivor services. The bill was signed into law on Luna's birthday. She would have turned 18 that day. The rescued girls and I stay in close touch through a support group that meets every month. We call ourselves the Phoenix Sisters, women who rose from the ashes of what was supposed to destroy us. Carmen, who'd lost so much weight in the safe house, is now studying to become a nutritionist, wanting to help other trauma survivors rebuild their relationships with food and their bodies. Sophia, the 15-year-old who is supposed to be shipped to Ukraine, is studying international law with plans to work for organizations that combat trafficking worldwide. Isabella, who never stopped fighting even in captivity, became a self-defense instructor who teaches free classes for at-risk girls in her community. Aria, the youngest at 14, is now in therapy and doing well in school, but still struggles with trust issues and nightmares. She's the reminder that some trauma takes years to heal, if it ever fully heals at all. We support each other through the difficult days, the anniversaries of our near trafficking, the moments when memories overwhelm us, the times when well-meaning people ask intrusive questions about our experiences. During one particularly difficult group session, Sophia asked a question that haunted all of us. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Essie hadn't been brave enough to document everything? How many more girls would have disappeared? Agent Torres, who sometimes joined our group sessions, answered honestly, based on the intelligence we gathered, the network was expanding rapidly. They had plans to begin recruiting from middle schools, targeting even younger girls. Without Esperanza's evidence, we estimate they would have trafficked at least 50 more victims in the following year alone, 50 more Lunas, 50 more Rosas, 50 more girls whose families would receive fake letters while their daughters suffered unimaginable horrors. Dad got out of prison after 18 months, exactly as predicted. He'd been a model prisoner, participating in every counseling program available, leading a Gamblers Anonymous group, and continuing to cooperate with ongoing trafficking investigations. He wrote me letters constantly during his incarceration, long, rambling confessions about his gambling addiction, desperate apologies for what he'd allowed to happen, promises that he'd changed, pleas for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. I know I don't deserve it. His final letter read, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to let me try to be your father again. I failed you in the worst possible way, but I want to spend the rest of my life making it right. I never wrote back. When he was released, he moved to a halfway house in Albuquerque and got a job washing dishes at a diner. He started attending meetings for parents of trafficking victims, speaking about the warning signs he'd ignored, the desperation that had made him vulnerable to grandmother's manipulation. But I couldn't bring myself to see him. Every time I thought about that breakfast table, about him signing papers that put a price on my life, the anger rose up like bile in my throat. Mom had a different kind of breakdown after the trial. She developed severe agoraphobia and couldn't leave her apartment for months. She lost her job, had to move to a smaller place, and started drinking heavily to cope with the guilt and shame. She sent birthday cards every year that I threw away unopened. She left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. She reached out through Aunt Carmen, begging for just one chance to explain, to apologize, to try to repair what she'd helped destroy. But I couldn't forgive her either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because she'd had a choice. When grandmother presented that contract, when those men came to evaluate me like livestock, when the medical exams were scheduled, she'd had opportunities to say no, to protect me, to find another solution. Instead, she'd chosen to save herself and sacrifice me. Diego wrote to me sometimes from Denver. Aunt Carmen sent pictures of him playing baseball, graduating 8th grade, smiling with friends. He was healing in ways the rest of us couldn't, but in his letters, I could sense the weight he carried, the knowledge that his family had been willing to sell his sister, the confusion about why everything had to fall apart, the fear that people would always see him as connected to the trafficking operation. "Do you hate Mom and Dad?" he asked in one letter. I stared at that question for hours before writing back. "I don't hate them," I finally replied, "but I can't trust them. And I can't pretend that what they did was okay just because they were scared or desperate. Some things can't be forgiven, even by family. Last year, I got a call from Agent Torres that changed everything. We found something you should know about," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when delivering news that could be good or devastating. They discovered grandmother's real records, not the files I'd found in her cabinet, but her actual master database, hidden in a safety deposit box registered under a fake name in 3 different states. She kept detailed notes about every girl she'd trafficked over 20 years. Agent Torres explained, including their final locations, the buyers' real identities, and in some cases, what happened to them after the sales were completed. My heart stopped. "Luna, we've been able to rescue 3 more girls using her information," Agent Torres said. "They're alive because of your courage to expose this network when you did." Luna, the 14-year-old I thought was dead based on the deceased stamp in her file, was actually being held in a compound in Bulgaria. The death certificate had been forged to close her case and stop any family inquiries. When Bulgarian authorities raided the location based on grandmother's intelligence, they found Luna, now 17, along with 8 other trafficking victims from various countries. She'd been forced into prostitution for 3 years, had suffered multiple injuries and infections, and had tried to kill herself twice, but she was alive. The first time I spoke to Luna via video call, arranged through victim services and international law enforcement, I barely recognized the laughing girl from the school photos I'd seen in her file. She was painfully thin, her hair had been shaved off, and she had scars on her arms that told stories I didn't want to imagine. But her eyes still held fire. You saved my life, she said in accented English she'd learned during recovery. When police came, they said American girl named Esperanza gave them information to find us. I knew it was you from the news stories. I started crying and couldn't stop. I thought you were dead, I whispered. I saw the stamp in your file. I thought I was too late to help you. You were not too late, she said firmly. Every day in that place I hoped someone would come. I never stopped believing, and you made it happen. Luna is now in intensive therapy and rehabilitation in Bulgaria, working with organizations that help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. She wants to become a social worker to help other girls who experience what she experienced. The two other rescued girls were Maria Santos from Honduras, who'd been trafficked at 15 and held for 2 years in a domestic servitude situation in Germany, and Yuki Tanaka from Japan, who'd been sold into forced labor in a factory in Thailand at age 16. All 3 girls credit my exposure of the network with saving their lives. We've been able to rescue 3 girls and prosecute 17 additional traffickers using the intelligence from your grandmother's records, Agent Torres told me. But there's something else. We've identified 12 other families who were targeted by the network but didn't go through with the transactions. Your case going public scared them away from participating. 12 more families. 12 more girls who didn't disappear because other parents saw the news coverage and realized what they'd almost done to their own daughters. The ripple effects kept spreading. Detective Maria Gutierrez from Phoenix PD started a task force specifically focused on family-facilitated trafficking after seeing how common it was in grandmother's network. People think trafficking is always strangers grabbing kids, she told a reporter, but family trafficking is actually the fastest growing category we're seeing. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, people who are supposed to protect children, selling them to pay debts, support drug habits, or just for money. The task force has investigated 47 cases in 3 years and rescued 23 children from family trafficking situations. I'm 19 now, starting my sophomore year at Georgetown University, with a full scholarship funded by donations from people who heard my story. I'm double majoring in international law and psychology, with plans to work for organizations that combat trafficking worldwide. My dorm room is covered with photos of Luna, Carmen, Sophia, Isabella, and Aria, reminders of why I survived, why I spoke up, why I can never stop fighting for girls who are still trapped in the network that was supposed to consume me. Every semester, I get letters from girls who've escaped trafficking situations after learning about warning signs from news coverage of my case. A 15-year-old in Texas called the trafficking hotline when her aunt started arranging her marriage to an older man, leading to the discovery of a network targeting girls in immigrant communities. A 16-year-old in California recognized the manipulation tactics her boyfriend was using to isolate her from family and friends, realizing he was grooming her for trafficking before it escalated. A 14-year-old in Florida told her school counselor when her stepfather started talking about introducing her to business opportunities with his friends, preventing what investigators later determined would have been a sale into domestic servitude. These are the victories that keep me going when the nightmares come, when I wake up in cold sweats thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't found those files, if I hadn't been brave enough to document everything, if I just tried to run instead of fighting back. Last month, I received a letter that made me realize how far the consequences of my choice had reached. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a researcher at Johns Hopkins who studies family trafficking patterns, wrote to tell me that my case had become a cornerstone study in her field. The documentation you gathered and the courage you showed in exposing your own family's participation has fundamentally changed how we understand and combat trafficking, she wrote. Your case is taught in criminal justice programs, social work schools, and law enforcement academies across the country. The Esperanza Protocol is now standard procedure when investigating suspected trafficking cases, looking for family involvement, documenting financial motivations, and understanding how traffickers manipulate cultural expectations and economic desperation to convince families to participate in selling their children. But the letter that affected me most came from an unexpected source. Viktor Petrov, the man who was supposed to be my husband, wrote to me from federal prison where he's serving life without parole. You destroyed my life, his letter began, and I almost threw it away immediately. But something made me keep reading. I have spent 3 years in this cell thinking about what you did, and I realize now that you destroyed the life of a monster. You saved those girls, but you also saved me from becoming even worse than I already was. He went on to describe his own childhood in Russia, how he'd been sold by his family to criminal organizations at age 12, how years of abuse had turned him into someone who saw children as commodities instead of human beings. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he wrote. I'm not asking for sympathy. I am telling you that what you did was right, and brave, and necessary. You stopped me from destroying more lives. You stopped your grandmother from destroying more families. You changed everything. At the end of the letter, he included information about 3 other trafficking networks he'd worked with during his criminal career, details he was sharing with federal prosecutors in hopes that more victims could be rescued. I forwarded his letter to Agent Torres, who confirmed that his information had already led to 2 more arrests and the rescue of 1 additional trafficking victim. Even the man who was supposed to destroy my life had been changed by my choice to fight back. When people ask if I regret exposing my family, if I regret destroying the only life I'd ever known, I think about Luna video calling me from Bulgaria to show me the painting she'd finished in art therapy. I think about Carmen teaching a self-defense class to middle school girls, empowering them to protect themselves. I think about Sophia interning with an international human rights organization, using her experience to help draft policies that protect trafficking victims. I think about Isabella speaking at conferences about survivor empowerment, refusing to let her trauma define her limitations. I think about Arya, still healing but alive, still fighting, still believing that the world can be good despite everything she's endured. I think about the 43 other girls on grandmother's list who will never be sold because the network is destroyed. I think about the 12 families who decided not to participate after seeing the consequences of what my family did. I think about the investigators who use my case to recognize warning signs in other families. I think about the laws that have changed because lawmakers saw what happens when trafficking hides behind cultural traditions and family authority. And I remember what grandmother said during her final phone call from prison, 6 months before she died of a heart attack in her cell. "You destroyed your own family," she hissed, her voice as cold and bitter as ever. Was it worth it? Was destroying everyone you loved worth saving a few strangers? I thought about Diego, who was safe with Aunt Carmen and thriving in school, no longer living in a house where children could be sold to pay adult debts. I thought about the girls who were alive because I spoke up, because I documented everything, because I chose truth over family loyalty. I thought about the families who would never face this choice because the network that preyed on them was gone. Yes, I told her, my voice steady and sure, it was worth it. Saving those girls was worth everything, and I hung up on her forever. 3 years later, I still believe that. Even on the hard days, even when I miss having a family, even when I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd just kept quiet and found another way to escape. Because some things are more important than family loyalty. Some things are more important than keeping secrets. Some fights are worth losing everything for. And some choices once made define who you are forever. I chose to be someone who protects children instead of someone who stays silent while they're destroyed. I chose to be someone who documents truth instead of someone who lives comfortable lies. I chose to be someone who breaks cycles instead of someone who perpetuates them. And every day when I wake up in my dorm room covered with photos of survivors, when I read letters from girls who escaped because of warnings my case provided, when I study international law so I can fight trafficking on a global scale, I know I made the right choice, even if it cost me everything I thought I wanted, even if it meant losing the family I thought I needed, even if it meant growing up faster than any 16-year-old should have to. Because the girls who lived, they were worth it. They are worth it. They will always be worth it. And as long as I have breath in my body and fight in my spirit, I'll keep making sure other girls know they're worth fighting for too.